It's something we don't always want to think about, but have you ever really stopped to consider, like, your last decade of life? What do you hope you'll still be doing? What experiences do you want to be having? Because what if I told you that the choices you make today, right now, actually have a surprisingly powerful impact on shaping that future? Welcome to this deep dive where we're exploring the fascinating science of longevity through the lens of Dr. Peter Attia's insights, as discussed on Bookshelf. We want to unpack exactly how we can take those concrete steps toward a healthier and, a more vibrant last chapter.
Yeah, and Dr. Attia's work, it's really gained a lot of traction, hasn't it? Especially for people focused on proactive health and living longer, better lives. He gets really deep into the science of how we age. And one of the core ideas is how we can actively influence our health trajectory, particularly looking towards what he calls the marginal decade, those final 10 years. The key thing really is that planning proactively for this time can dramatically impact your quality of life. It shifts it potentially from decline to, well, continued engagement.
Okay, let's dig into that, this marginal decade. What's the core idea there?
So it refers to that last decade of life. And Dr. Attia really emphasizes that it's often marked by a noticeable decline, physical abilities, sometimes cognitive too. And that can really affect your enjoyment, your independence. What's kind of striking is that many people don't even realize they're in it until suddenly they just can't do the things that used to bring them joy.
That really resonates. I think we've probably all seen examples of this, haven't we? Maybe someone who, cherished their independence and now struggles with just daily tasks, or a friend who had to give up a hobby they loved because physically they just couldn't manage it anymore.
Precisely. Yeah. Dr. Attia shared this quite poignant story. He was at a funeral for a friend's parent, and he realized that the last 10 years of that person's life were really characterized by a significant inability to do what they loved. Specifically, playing golf and gardening, just physical constraints. And like you said, that's a pattern many of us have seen in our own families, our communities.
So if the goal is to navigate our own marginal decade with, more vitality, more independence, what kind of framework does Dr. Attia suggest? How do we even start thinking about that?
He introduces this really compelling idea. He calls it the Centenarian Decathlon. Basically, the concept is to identify the 10 most important physical activities that you personally want to be capable of doing in your final decade. Think of it like training for 10 key events, not a sports competition, but like the competition of life, making sure you can still live it fully. It's not just about adding years, it's defining what living well means in those later years and actually training for that.
I love that reframing. It moves beyond just thinking about these abstract health goals, doesn't it? It gets down to the specifics of how we actually want to live. Can you give us some examples, like what might be on someone's Centenarian Decathlon list?
Absolutely. Dr. Attia shared some of his own personal goals, which I think helps illustrate it. One is being able to keep traveling and exploring with his partner. And he gave a really specific example. Being able to handle 100 meters of stairs in Bali to go whitewater rafting. And he pointed out going down those stairs requires what's called eccentric strength, that controlled lengthening of muscles, while coming up needs concentric strength, the muscle shortening plus endurance. So two different physical demands just in that one activity.
Wow, okay. That level of detail really highlights how much we need to think about the mechanics of just everyday activities or things we want to do. It's not just, I want to travel, it's the actual physical challenges involved.
Exactly. Another one of his goals is to actively play with future grandchildren. And he contrasted that with his memory of his own father often having to sort of watch from the sidelines, like from the kitchen while the kids played outside because of physical limits. That one hits on an emotional level, right? The desire to be in it active, not just watching.
It really does, yeah.
Yeah.
What other kinds of things might people put on their list?
Well, he also mentioned things like just being able to lift things, feeling capable of, say, protecting his family, which speaks to a really fundamental sense of security, independence. It could be carrying groceries, helping someone move something. The emotional weight of those basic physical abilities is actually pretty profound when you think about it.
Okay, so you figure out these 10 key activities. What's the next step in this proactive approach?
Right. So the crucial part then is breaking those bigger goals down into very specific underlying movement patterns. For instance, the skills for whitewater rafting paddling, maneuvering, maybe pulling yourself back in the raft. They're quite different from playing a spontaneous game of football with kids. That needs agility, quick reactions, totally different movements. And then something as simple as being able to pick something up off the floor safely. That requires yet another set of specific movements. Dr. Attia estimates there are around 27 fundamental physical requirements that underpin most of the activities we want to do.
27. Okay, that really underscores the complexity, doesn't it? Maintaining physical independence and the need for maybe a more nuanced approach to training than just general exercise.
It does, and it highlights why just a generic fitness routine might not really cut it. It might not prepare you for the specific demands of your Centenarian Decathlon.
Oh,
You need to think about training the specific movements that support those long-term goals you've set.
Now, something I think a lot of people feel, especially as they get older, is that physical decline is just inevitable. It's part of aging. Maybe it's mostly genetic. What's Dr. Attia's take on that?
Yeah, he strongly challenges that viewpoint, though he gets why people feel that way, especially
Yeah.
if they've seen parents or grandparents decline significantly. But he emphasizes that while, yes, mortality is inevitable, the rate at which we decline, especially in strength, stamina, movement, that rate is largely within our control.
That's actually a really empowering message, isn't it? It shifts the focus from just passively accepting aging to taking an active role in shaping our health span.
Exactly. Active role is the key. He even referenced a study, I think it was in the journal Cell, looking at exercise in older adults. They found that consistent, significant exercise helped maintain the health of the mitochondria, the little power plants in our cells, compared to sedentary folks who showed a noticeable decline in mitochondrial function. And this supports the bigger point, the rate of decline in muscle mass, strength, cardiorespiratory fitness. It differs hugely between those who exercise consistently and those who don't.
So it sounds like the earlier we start thinking about this proactive approach, the better the outcome down the road, more benefits.
Absolutely. Dr. Attia uses a great analogy. It's like investing for retirement. The earlier you start, the more time for compounding, the bigger the payoff. He also shared this really striking graph. It showed people with lower muscle mass in their 30s tend to cross a kind of disability threshold around age 70, whereas those with more muscle mass at 30, they stay way above that line for much longer. It really drives home that what you do now impacts your future capabilities.
That's a powerful visual, a very compelling argument for starting sooner rather than later.
It is, and he uses another analogy too, the glider. Our health span is like a glider. The higher the cliff you launch from, meaning the better your physiologic headroom, the longer that glider stays airborne. And physiologic headroom here means your reserves of muscle mass, strength, cardiopulmonary fitness. Everyone's glider lands eventually, sure, but starting with more reserve gives you significantly more time before function becomes really limited.
Okay, so if we want to build that higher cliff, maximize our health span, what are the key health areas Dr. Attia says we should focus on?
He highlights several critical things. Muscle mass and muscle strength are absolutely paramount. But he points to one specific measurable metric that he considers the single best predictor of longevity overall, and that's V2 max.
V2 max. Okay, yeah, that term comes up a lot in fitness discussions. Can you break that down? What is it exactly, and why is it so important according to him?
Right. So V2 max is essentially the maximum rate of oxygen your body can consume during maximal exercise. Think of it as the peak amount of oxygen your body can take in and actually use per minute. Oxygen, of course, is fundamental for producing ATP, the main energy currency in our cells. So the more efficiently you use oxygen, the more energy you can generate. Measuring it accurately usually involves specialized equipment, often a mask that analyzes your breath during a graded exercise test, like on a treadmill or a bike, getting progressively harder.
So as you push harder, your oxygen use goes up and up until it hits a ceiling, a plateau. Even if you try harder, that plateau is the V2 max.
Exactly that. And Dr. Aitia emphasizes this remarkably strong link between V2 max and longevity. He cites a statistic that's, well, it's pretty eye-opening. If you compare individuals in the top 2% for V2 max for their age group versus those in the bottom 25%, the difference in their risk of dying from any cause over the next year can be as much as 400%.
400%. Wow, that's a staggering difference.
It is, and he points out this gap tends to get even wider as we age. So having a higher V2 max isn't just about being a better runner or cyclist. It's a really powerful indicator of your overall physiological resilience, your body's ability to handle stress and health challenges.
So it's not just about delaying death, but also about keeping the physiological capacity to live a full, active life as we get older, like those decathlon goals.
Precisely, yeah. Dr. Attia talks about using V2 max not just for mortality prediction, but as a benchmark for understanding health span, for understanding our capacity for different activities at different ages. He references data showing roughly the V2 max levels needed for things like running certain mile times or climbing a few flights of stairs without getting winded. Knowing your V2 max gives you a clearer picture of what your body might be capable of down the line.
That makes it incredibly practical, actually. It connects this sometimes abstract fitness number to real-world function that matters day to day. Did he share any specific examples of V2 max results?
He did. He mentioned someone named Jack who did the testing. Jack's V2 max was 4.1 liters per minute, which, adjusted for his weight, was 56.5 millijoule albumin. For someone in his 20s, that put him in the 97th percentile. So, exceptional cardiovascular fitness. Dr. Attia also noted Jack's heart rate recovery, how fast his heart rate drops after stopping intense exercise. That's another strong predictor of mortality. Jack's dropped 28 beats in the first minute, which is also really good. And they also did zone 2 testing, looking at fat burning efficiency during lower intensity exercise. His results there were good too.
Okay, so it really sounds like understanding your V2 max and actively working to improve it could be one of the single most impactful things you can do for long-term health and for that marginal decade.
Absolutely, it seems that way. Now let's maybe pivot to some actionable strategies building on these ideas. Dr. Attia really pushes for training with the marginal decade in mind. Like athletes train specifically for their sport. This means really considering the demands of your personal Centenarian Decathlon and tailoring your exercise program to meet those future needs.
So moving beyond just general fitness and getting more targeted, more purposeful with our training.
Precisely. And when it comes to resistance training, he discussed the different rep ranges and what they generally target. So lower reps, maybe 1 to 5, tend to be best for building maximal strength. Moderate reps, say 7-12, often associated more with hypertrophy muscle growth. And higher reps, like 15 plus, usually focus more on muscular endurance. Dr. Attia mentioned his current approach often involves working in that 8-12 rep range, but leaving maybe 1 or 2 reps in the tank, not going to absolute failure. Trying to balance strength gains with minimizing injury risk. He typically does resistance training about 3 times a week, alongside 4 days of cardio, mostly zone 2, that lower intensity work, but with 1 higher intensity day specifically to push that V2 max.
That sounds like a pretty solid structured approach. What about warming up before lifting? A lot of people just hop on a bike for 5 minutes.
Right, but Dr. Attia follows a much more specific warm-up. It's quite different. Instead of general cardio, he really prioritizes core stabilization, he mentioned DNS, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, which focuses on ideal movement patterns via the core, then dynamic movements that mimic the actual exercises he's about to do. And finally, light sets with the weights he'll be using. The idea is to specifically prep the muscles and the nervous system for that workout's demands, not just generally raise the heart rate.
That makes a lot of sense. Activate the right muscles, ensure stability before loading them. What about injury prevention? That's huge, especially if we're talking about training consistently for decades.
Absolutely crucial. And Dr. Attia stresses that injury risk isn't just about, lifting too heavy without warming up. It also involves the health and the pliability of our tendons. He highlights the importance of including some jumping exercises, even low-impact versions, to help maintain the shock absorption capacity and resilience of our tendons. Keeps them adaptable, less prone to issues.
Jumping. Okay, that's maybe not the first thing people think of for longevity exercise,
Right.
especially older adults.
Maybe not, but it's really key for preserving power and that bounce in the lower body, which is vital for mobility and crucially preventing falls later on. And shifting back just briefly to muscle mass itself, Dr. Attia really hammered home its importance for longevity, ranked right up there after strength and V2 max. He explained muscle tissue plays this huge role in glucose metabolism. It acts like a big sink for glucose, helping regulate blood sugar. That's critical for preventing metabolic problems like type 2 diabetes as we age and all the complications that come with it. Plus, more muscle can help with regulating fat storage, too.
So muscle isn't just about being strong, it's deeply connected to our metabolic health. That's a key point.
Precisely. He also brought up grip strength and the ability to do a dead hang as strong correlates of longevity. Strong grip often reflects overall upper body strength, the ability to handle physical tasks, and it's also linked to a lower risk of falls.
And falls.
Yeah,
Yeah, they are a massive concern as people age. The consequences can be absolutely devastating.
they really are. Dr. Attia cited some sobering stats. For people over 65 who fall and break a hip or femur, the mortality rate within a year is somewhere between 15 and 30%. And even for survivors, about half never get back to their previous level of function. He explained that the inability to catch yourself, to recover from a slip, is often a power deficit, specifically in the type 2B muscle fibers. Those are the fast twitch fibers for quick, forceful movements. And guess what? They're often the first to decline with age. Which again circles back to why power training, like those jumping exercises, is so important to maintain that reactive ability.
So those little stumbles, being able to catch yourself, that's power in action. And losing that ability is a big risk factor.
Yeah. Exactly. He also briefly touched on balance training. Using unstable surfaces, things like that, he framed it as problem solving for your feet and lower legs, improving stability. And on flexibility, his perspective was interesting. He suggested limitations aren't always just tight muscles. Often, it might be neurological, like the nervous system is putting the brakes on because it senses instability. He used his own back pain recovery anecdote involving DNS exercises and breathing to illustrate how restoring stability allowed more movement.
Huh. That's a different way to think about flexibility, not just stretching harder.
Right. And finally, just practically, he shared a simple example of his strength split. Monday, maybe lower body, Wednesday, arms, shoulders, Friday, chest back. Around 4 exercises per muscle group, maybe 5 working sets. He also gave a nod to the rise of endurance events like marathons or HYROX, acknowledged the good aspects but stressed training sustainably and safely to avoid injury over the long haul.
Okay, so pulling this all together, it really feels like the power to shape that last decade, to make it vibrant, starts right now. It involves defining what you want to do, that Centenarian Decathlon, realizing a lot of decline isn't inevitable, and then really focusing on building and keeping muscle mass and strength, boosting that V2 max, and training smart to prevent injuries.
That's a great summary. It's about moving from being reactive about health to being truly proactive, setting meaningful, tangible goals, and understanding these key physiological levers, strength, V2 max, muscle mass, that really influence how well we live, especially in those later years.
So for everyone listening,
Hmm.
what are your initial thoughts? What comes to mind when you think about your potential marginal decade? And based on what we've talked about, is there one area of resistance training, maybe cardio for V2 max, perhaps power exercises like jumping that you might think about focusing on a bit more intentionally?
Yeah, and maybe build on that with this final thought, given how much influence we actually seem to have over our health span. What's
Yes.
one small but meaningful action you could take this week? Something that contributes to your future well-being, helps ensure you can really enjoy that last decade. Because ultimately, it's about more than just adding years to life, isn't it? It's about adding life to those years.